Hindi ka iiba. Abutin ang iyong ngitihin ba? Pagpagin mga balakid ka. Kampi ang mga tala. Mundo mo ito.
Mabuhay or in Kapampangan, luwid kayo. Welcome back to my channel. It's me, Kirby, Araullo, your friendly Pinoy Historian. And if you are new to my channel, in this channel, I make videos about our people's history, culture, and everything in between. So if you like any of those things, don't forget to like, share this video, comment down below, and please subscribe. And as requested by many of you, in today's video, I'll be doing my reaction to the new music video from Alamat for their new song, ABKD. But before we begin, here are some few reminders. If you want to support my research and my channel, please consider being my patron or being a member of my YouTube channel. And you can also get copies of any of my books, coloring books, and ebooks, so check them out on my website in the links down below. Now today's topic is actually a bit complicated, so we actually won't be able to cover everything that I want to talk about in this reaction video. But I do hope that this video will help you ignite that curiosity inside you to dig deeper, to learn more, and do something productive with that knowledge. So if you have an open mind and genuinely want to learn about these topics, then this video is for you. Okay, so Alamat's new ABKD music video. So first, we'll start with some of the things that I like, talking about the things that I like or love about this music video, about this song, and then we'll dig deeper into the historical and cultural context behind the music video, and then at the very end, we'll also talk more about, the overall empowering message of this song. So without further ado, Alamat, handa, rap! So for their first year anniversary, the Pinoy pop or PPop idol group Alamat released an official music video for their new song ABKD. And to truly appreciate this song and music video, one must really have this cultural and historical context on why we as a society are here where we are today. So long story short, I love the message of this song and how it is shown beautifully in the music video. I love that Alamat is staying true to its brand by again beautifully incorporating the different languages of the Philippines into their songs. And in this song, a lot of fans and listeners are introduced to the Sambal language of Central Luzon, a language that, sadly, a lot of Filipinos today are actually not familiar with. So for those who, message me on my social media, for those who have been asking in the comment section, the Sambal language is the native language of Zambales and parts of Pangasinan. Sambal, Zambales. And it belongs to the bigger group called the Zambalic languages, which also includes the different languages spoken by the Indigenous Aetas. So it's really nice and refreshing to hear these beautiful languages in the mainstream pop culture of the Philippines. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first mainstream song in the Philippines where you can actually hear the Sambal languages of Central Luzon. Now, what I really love about this music video is, featuring the Indigenous Aetas. Not just in the background, but actually front and center. Ika nga sila yung bida. Celebrating their beauty and talent. Celebrating our Indigenous Aetas. Celebrating people who are, sadly, often left in the shadows of our society. So who are the Aetas? The Aetas of Central Luzon, like the Aeta Magindi and the Aeta Maganchi, are among the different ethnic groups that are collectively known as the Aetas or the Negritos, which in Spanish literally means little black people. And they also include indigenous people such as the Ati of Panay, the Dumagats of Eastern Luzon, and many others. And actually, other related indigenous groups can also be found in countries like Malaysia and Thailand. But contrary to popular belief, they are not actually related to similar looking ethnic groups of Central Africa. In other words, they're indigenous to Southeast Asia. Now collectively, the Aetas are believed to be the oldest indigenous communities in what is now the Philippines. While the date and the method of their arrival to the islands are still being debated by scholars, the consensus is that they are no doubt one of the first people to call the islands of Southeast Asia their home. Indigenous people who are believed to be amongst the earliest people to call our islands their motherland. And I plan on creating more videos dedicated to the Aetas in the future, so stay tuned. So apart from having a direct Aeta ancestor from centuries ago, I was also exposed to the struggles of our Indigenous Aetas at a very young age. My dad, who was a government official and a grassroots community organizer back in the motherland, he used to take me with him when visiting the Aeta villages of our province. He would often encourage me to be friends with the Aetas, to immerse myself with the community, to check my privileges, and more importantly, to genuinely learn about their realities. Growing up, I also have a lot of memories case of my dad leaving in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, to personally bring Aetas to the hospitals. In fact, the day that I was born, my dad was actually up in the mountains helping an Aeta community. But anyways, my point is that at a very early age, I was exposed to how our indigenous Aetas struggle, how they are marginalized, how they are tokenized and exploited. But sadly, not a lot of Filipinos are exposed to these realities. Hence why the majority have very little knowledge, very little understanding of the Aetas. Sadly, many still have a lot of prejudice against darker-skinned Filipinos and indigenous people like the Aetas. Many would either openly discriminate against them or subconsciously tokenize and exploit them. So why exactly do we have such prevalent, such widespread discrimination and prejudice against the indigenous Aetas? While there's no short answer to this question, let us instead briefly look at the history of colorism in the Philippines. One of the most subtle yet biggest manifestations of racism is what is called colorism, or the expressions and practices that celebrate or discriminate against a person based on their physical appearances in relation to whiteness. Colorism gives the most advantages to those whose appearances are closest to the characteristics of being white. Now obviously, on the other end of this spectrum are those with darker skin, and the darker their appearance is, the more disadvantages they experience, the more injustices they face. And it feeds into this idea that in order to get ahead, one must act and appear closer to being white. And over the centuries, it's a culture that is seen in the mainstream Philippine media and the dominant standards of beauty in the Philippines. And elements of it can be felt in the overall Filipino culture and society. Now, colorism is also experienced globally, resulting from centuries of European colonialism and Western imperialism. It has always been a race-based hierarchy that is found in every corner and every loopholes of society, from education to the criminal justice system, from housing to healthcare. It is the practice and the ideology that created this uneven global society in favor of those who are white or with lighter skin, at the expense of everybody else. And although the term colorism did not yet exist in the 1800s, Dr. Jose Rizal wrote extensively about the culture of colorism in colonial Philippines, how our colonial society was structured along the racial lines, along the color of one's skin. I mean, there's literally a series of paintings created in the 1700s known as the Las Castas. So literally, the colonial caste system of the Spanish Empire. And this was based on a person's so-called limpieza de sangre, or in English, the purity of blood. And by pure blood, they meant white Catholic Europeans. So the Philippines of the 19th century had a feudal structure dominated by Spanish-born Spaniards, aka the Peninsulares, at the top of society, followed by the Spaniards born in the Philippines known as the Insulares. Overall, the purebred Spaniards dominated power and wealth in our society. The mestizos, or those with mixed heritage, lingered in the middle. The indios, or the indigenous brown people, are pushed to the bottom, while the negritos, the indigenous black people, were not even included at all. So long story short, the native population was exploited, and the indigenous people were marginalized at the very bottom. For the most part, the lighter your skin was, the higher up you were in the class system. Although of course, there existed very rare exceptions. And sadly, colorism in the Philippines did not end once the Spaniards had left. Instead, it persisted and even thrived throughout the American occupation to the present day. Colorism is the reason why skin whitening is one of the top industries in the Philippines, or why the majority of Filipino celebrities are those with lighter skin tones. And as many of you know, I've written quite a lot about these topics in my very first book. So if you want to learn more, check out my book, Black Lives and Brown Freedom, about the Philippine-American War and the solidarity between black and brown people fighting for liberation. And I also highly recommend the book Brown Skin, White Minds by Dr. E.J.R. David. So shout out to Kong E.J. Dakala salamat for this amazing book, this groundbreaking book. And please check out the links below for more resources to learn more about these topics and how to help our communities. Now, what exactly is racism? So racism is not a mere hatred or dislike against someone of another race. Prejudice and hatred alone does not equate to racism. What people often forget or overlook is that racism is actually a system of oppression, an entire society reinforced by systems of power targeting people based on their roots and the color of their skin. Now, racism does not only refer to the outward hatred and violence against people of color, such as the lynching of black people or the atrocities of the Philippine-American War. It could also manifest as daily aggressions and discriminations, from the media to the standards of beauty to the hiring practices, and yes, even in our history books, racism finds a way to affect everybody in more ways than one. And again, to be honest, the American occupation of the Philippines did not fix anything, but rather, it perpetuated this idea of the indigenous peoples as savages. Savages that must be saved by white people. And you can learn more about how they did all of this in my reaction to Alamat's Kasmala music video from last year. So make sure to watch it later today. Now, this does not mean that, there was no colorism before colonialism. Because pre-colonial Philippines, or the societies, the cultures of our ancestors, it was not a paradise. It was not a perfect society. But by looking at how both the Spanish colonialism and American imperialism shaped our society, we cannot deny that the extreme prejudice and exploitation of darker-skinned people became more widespread and became the norm under their rule. For example, the displacement of Aetas from their ancestral homelands is nothing new. In fact, many colonial towns in the Philippines were established by pushing away the indigenous inhabitants who once lived and thrived in these fertile lands. In studying history, one can also find evidences of colonial officials instigating animosities between the native populations. An example of this would be how they encouraged divisions and hostilities, violence between the Sambals, the Kapampangans, and the Aetas of Central Luzon. They literally encouraged the Sambals to raid and enslave the Aetas, to sell them as slaves. They also incentivized Kapampangans to drive out Aetas from their lands, in order to create more haciendas, not to feed the people, but to make profit that only benefited those at the top of colonial society. Now, I'm not saying that the pre-colonial relations between the diverse indigenous ethnic groups of the Philippines were always friendly, but we see more cordial relations from the pre-colonial period. For example, my own ancestors, the Aetas of Pampanga, they were once known as exceptional master archers who fought alongside Kapampangan warriors in countless battles. We even see Aeta chieftains being respected as a Kapampangan datu, and one of them was actually my own ancestor, whose descendants became prominent Kapampangans but remained proud of their Aeta roots. In fact, we still carry the name in our last names, Pabalan. And this included scholars and revolutionary katipuneros like Mariano Proceso Pabalan y Byron, who wrote the Kapampangan poem Labuad Mapalad in 1898, which led to the official lyrics of the national anthem of the Philippines, written in Spanish in 1899 as Filipinas by his friend Jose Palma. So we literally owe our national anthem to a Kapampangan with proud Aeta roots. But I bet many of you don't even know that. Other examples would be how the Ati people of Panay were honored as the original owners of the land by the pre-colonial Visayans. And in pre-colonial Sambales, many Sambals lived alongside the Aetas. In fact, early colonial records also indicate a more cordial and more intimate relationship between the Sambals and the Aeta communities. And actually, if you look at the indigenous traditions of the Sambals, the Aetas, and the Kapampangans, there's actually a lot of things that we share in our cultures. In fact, the languages of the Sambals, the Aetas, and the Kapampangans are linguistically closest to one another. There's a lot of oral traditions and historical records that indicate a more tolerant relationships between the diverse indigenous people of the Philippines. Again, I'm not saying that there was no discrimination, no colorism before colonialism, in our pre-colonial societies of what is now the Philippines. But then again, looking at it closely, by importing Western type of racism, Western type of colorism, throughout the centuries, it only made it so much worse for our indigenous black and brown people of our islands. And we can see this by looking at the situation, how the Aetas are doing today. The Aetas are officially recognized today as one of the legitimate ethnic minorities by the Philippine government. Now, to its credit, the Philippines is one of the very few countries, very few nation-states in the world to officially recognize ethnic minorities within their borders, at least on paper. Yet, the realities and situation in their villages demands more than just recognition on paper. The Aeta communities throughout the archipelago are facing many problems and issues that threaten their survival. These indigenous black people of the Philippines are facing extinction, and not a single legislation on paper is genuinely protecting them from disappearing. They live in poverty with barely any opportunities for social mobility. Their communities remain underdeveloped, underfunded, and underserved. Their ancestral lands are being taken away by powerful people seeking to make profit. They remain one of the most poorly educated communities in the country. And in many areas, schools do not even exist. It is this perceived ignorance to modern life and deliberate lack of educational opportunities. This is what makes them more vulnerable to abuses such as land grabbing. They are not the stupid, uncivilized savages that society made us believe. In fact, their knowledge of the land is as vast as the oceans. The wisdom they inherited from their ancestors remain unbroken and transcends over thousands of years. Their deeply rooted reverence to Mother Nature is unrivaled. Their commitment to the protection of the mountains, the rivers, the jungles, the forests, and every creature living around them is in practice doing tremendously more than what is written in our most progressive environmental laws. They are not incompetent. They are far more brilliant than what we imagine them to be. They are, however, marginalized and exploited to the extremes. So we must ask ourselves, what can be done to help these marginalized communities gain access to proper education and equal opportunities? We must challenge ourselves to find ways to support their rights and protect their well-being. But we must not discriminate on their choices based on our own ideas of what must be done. Instead, we must respect their abilities to choose for themselves. In short, we must find meaningful ways to genuinely empower them. We must not dictate what to do nor impose upon them our own uninformed outsider perspectives. Because by doing so, it will not just be disrespectful but also a repeat of the colonial miseducation that has subjected our people to oppression and injustices for centuries. Actually, my cousin Araullo recently made documentaries about the Dumagats of the Sierra Madres and the Aita Maganchi of Capas Tarlac, and I'll include the links in the comments below, so check it out to learn more about our Indigenous Aetas today, especially during this time of the pandemic. Now, going back to Alamat ABKD song and music video. The song is a really good way to teach us how to love ourselves and be proud of who we are. And the fact that this song was written in a way that is easily understood by younger children makes it even more powerful by teaching our people at a very young age to believe in themselves, teaching them to be empowered. It is also teaching us and reminding us adults to unlearn all of these toxic things in our society. An upbeat, catchy reminder for us not to continue holding on to all of these toxic norms we find in our daily lives. I love that they put the lyrics in very simple terms that are easily understandable. Literally, in Tagalog, the song title itself means ABCD, Abakada. So this use of simple but powerful words, this alone reaches the masses, yet it still conveys this larger meaning behind this particular song. And this message is beautifully reinforced by the music video. For example, in the very beginning of the music video, they really make it apparent that, we must unlearn this idea that just because someone is whiter or lighter skin does not make them any more valuable than those with darker or black skin. And I love that the star of this music video is none other than a young indigenous Aeta, which reminds us of those who have been marginalized and exploited throughout our history. It challenges us to question our own perspectives on our own indigenous black people. And I hope that it makes us ask ourselves what we can do to break out of this whole toxic idea that darker skin automatically makes a person or an entire population inferior. So I love that the message of this song is beautifully embodied by the struggles and the journey of the young Aeta towards empowerment and self-love. For me, this is a really good song that sends this uplifting message heritage, not just about loving ourselves, but also respecting one another, and perhaps more importantly, of coming together to undo all of these toxic norms and injustices in our society. And that is it for me today. So let me know what you think about today's topic in the comments below. Like, what can we do better to make things better? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you like this video or learned a thing or two, don't forget to like, share this video, comment down below, and please subscribe. But of course, before we go, today's shoutout goes to all the Magiliws all over the world. Lalo-lalo na kina PPop Tita at kay Ethan Kibulon Tacon 27. Maraming salamat sa inyong suporta. And a very special shoutout to Sheila Romualdo, the amazing star of this music video. Congratulations, Sheila! Mabuhay ka, luwid ka! And actually, for those who are in the Philippines, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Vietnam, ano pa ba? If you're in Asia and you have Netflix, check out Sheila May's, her amazing award-winning movie Arisaka on Netflix. I mean, I don't have it here, but you should watch it. And of course, special shoutout and special thank you to my patron Rebecca. This video, any of my videos, will not be possible without the love and the support of all my patrons through the years. Kaya naman, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. So for those who want to help me make more videos like this, show your support and please be my patron or be a member of my YouTube channel. You can also support me by getting copies of any of my books, coloring book or ebooks, or any of the merch linked down below, especially this book, Black Lives and Brown Freedom, Untold Histories of War, Solidarity, and Genocide. All the topics, all the things we talked about today are covered in this book, so check it out in the links below. Maraming salamat, magsukol agyamanak, terima kasih, daghang salamat, dakal pong salamat, or in Sambal, lakwa salamat. See you next time, or in Tagalog kita kits and in Kapampangan, Mikitix!